So I believe I know everyone here. Dale is the president of the best institution, and we are here to recognize Professor Blair Morrissey as a distinguished professor. As I shared yesterday, I think it's about time that we really start to move forward in these sort of recognitions. We have lots of great professors over the years, and I think the best way to recognize the work that we've been doing is to not have it stop when their time at the institution stops. So, and thank you to the faculty for moving this process forward and allowing us as an institution to celebrate the great people who move through the institution. Now, my job is to introduce the legendary Dr. Andy Weigel, who will introduce our guest. And so, Andy has a 5-page presentation I think that he's going to give. So there's a board. Okay, so I'll back away and give Andy the plate.
Thank you. I'm just going to start with introducing our first speaker, which is Randy Lunsford, who was a student here of Blair's and taught here for years, and now retired until we talk him back and coming back and teaching. So we'll start with Randy.
So, okay, if I stand here? Let me grab my notes, just in case. Well, thank you, Andy. So many years ago, I was sitting in a classroom, very small classroom here at MCC. It's my first philosophy course, and I did not want to be there. You see, I had actually signed up for the course several times and actually dropped it before going to the first class. I was an engineering student at the time. So I really was only interested in taking courses in science and math at that time. And anyway, like a lot of people, I really didn't know what philosophy was all about. On top of that, I had people in my life at that time who advised against taking a course in philosophy. Surprising. But it was part of the humanities component required for an associate's science degree. So I finally committed to taking the class. But I was not thrilled about it. So, I guess I need my notes. Oh, okay. So, the most important part. An amazing thing happened to me in that first philosophy class. It changed my life. After that, I took virtually every philosophy course offered at MCC. A couple years later, I was somehow able to talk my wife, Joanne, who's here with us today, into me quitting my job in engineering, and so that we could move to Ann Arbor and I could continue my study of philosophy. No easy task, believe me. Why quit a good job in industry to study philosophy? Well, it was due in large part to the instructor in that first philosophy course. You see, this instructor had a unique ability to take a difficult subject and make it come alive. How did he do that? Well, he did that not only through his dynamic personality, as he presented in class, and his extraordinary teaching methods, but he did it by offering an example of how to live a good life, guided by reason. He was able, in that classroom, to rekindle in me childlike curiosity and sense of wonder that I had somehow lost growing up. Like Socrates, he stressed the importance of living an examined life. I no longer accepted what I was taught throughout my life. I questioned. I sought justification for my beliefs. And in that process, those hard-won beliefs guided me on my path to self-discovery. Under his tutelage and guidance, I acquired a trove of logic and critical thinking skills, which I was able to use to not only explore possibilities and ideas, but as a practical matter, to chart a course through my career in business and through my life in general. Notes again, sorry. Okay, bear with me, sorry Andy. Oh, an important aspect that I also forgot. Also due to no small part of his influence, I was able to fulfill a dream and to pass on the benefits of the study of philosophy to others. So I was given the opportunity to serve as adjunct instructor of philosophy here at MCC for over 25 years. The instructor that I'm speaking about is, of course, Blair Morrissey. It's difficult to overstate the impact that he has had on my life. I would not be the person I am today if it were not for him. He was my teacher, my mentor, and later, my colleague and my good friend. So it is an honor and a privilege today to speak to you and to congratulate Blair on this well-deserved recognition.
Well, that was wonderful. How do you go after that? Thank you, Randy. It's also my honor to say a few words about Blair, and I've got a couple of comments that others wrote that I want to about Blair that I want to read. I do want to point out first, Blair's nicely dressed, partially thanks to me. That's my tie. And we had dinner 2 nights ago, and he said to me, he said, you know, before you came, I think I used to wear a tie all the time. He said, I blame you for that. So, anyway, I don't have a tie. And he
to see you in a tie.
yeah, well, I guess, yeah, I cause others not to wear ties, but I do give them out. And I remember one time someone said, you know, Blair always had a fairly unique dress that kind of made him look professorish, I think. And someone said once, you know what the difference is? You know how I can tell the difference between summer and winter? I said, no, how's that? He says, well, in summer, Blair doesn't have socks on, and in winter, he wears socks with his Birkenstocks. It's summer. All right. Well, I thought I'd start with a few words Connor said, and I'll say some things, and then I'll finish with another former student of Blair's. So, students always give the best talks, right? So this is from Connor. Connor said, I never had the pleasure of working with Blair. Connor kind of replaced him, I guess. But I have gotten to know Blair over the years since he retired and have learned a lot from his various conversations and philosophy book club discussions about what it means to be a philosopher, an educator, and a model of civic engagement. From time to time, I bumped into former students of Blair's, and I was always struck by the warmth, respect, and gratitude with which they speak of him. Blair's intellectual and personal integrity is an inspiration. I only wish he could have knocked a little sense into my own head when I was a student myself. Maybe he wouldn't have studied so much Nietzsche. All right, so that's from Connor. All right, A few words from my own here. Tough to know how to narrow this down, but again, it's my pleasure to say a few things about Blair. He was a fine colleague for 9 years, and we've remained good friends to this day. Blair constantly strived to improve his students, the college, and himself during the 30 years he was at the college, or 30 plus years he was at the college. He was ahead of his time in many ways. He learned how to program computers and set up simulations for his students. For years there were the regular computers in the computer lab, the PCs, and then there were Blair's Apples, where you could see his students working there. So Blair was Apple before Apple was kind of popular. And he thought these programs could teach valuable lessons about the limits of self-interest and the importance of helping and respecting others that wasn't achievable in class. He knew students should develop themselves outside of class, so he required students to go to plays, lectures, clubs, and watch movies outside of class time. In fact, he once told me showing a movie during class is like having students read quietly for 2 hours during class. It's not something you should do. And I started Philosophy Club, or at least Blair would say I started it, but it was really with his pushing that I started Philosophy Club, and Philosophy Club succeeded for a number of years, largely due to Blair's sustaining it. And Philosophy Club would generally go this way. We have a topic, we talk about it for a while, kind of get some questions going with students and whatnot, but at the end, then Blair and I would get into it. And one time I asked a very quiet student, I said, you know, you never say anything, but you come every week. I said, are you enjoying yourself? Oh yeah, I love it when you two get into it. I think a lot of them thought, my God, how do they share an office? I was like, well, that's what we do in our office too. We love it. You know, it's what we like doing. So it was always a pleasure to share an office with Blair and talk philosophy and teaching and whatnot. Back to my notes here. He wanted also students to be prepared to have philosophical discussions, rigorous ones. So he wrote his own introductory material, a book called SCM, Supplementary Course Material. SCM, and that covered pretty much the first third of his class. He did it so well that when we had an outside discipline review, a gentleman from GVSU came in and pleaded that it be published. He said, this is good, you got to get this published. But Blair wouldn't have it. He said, why, when I can give it to my students for free? Blair was also known for caring for his students and to get to the heart of their problems, getting students to the services they need to help them. One clear example is an older student named Joe. Joe always struggled academically, but was pretty vocal. And it wasn't until Blair's class that he found out why. Blair was able to help him get proper testing and diagnosis of dyslexia. I think changed his life and led to a lifetime friendship between Joe and Blair. He even went a step further and started the College Success Seminar with Carol Thompson. Again, he didn't see students where they needed to be, and he did something about it. He chose to bring them up to listen better, learn better, and be better organized. Well-meaning administrators, there's one, would now say there's never been a student success initiative on this campus until now. I beg to differ. Blair's example and many others show that we seem to have had a college success initiative for about 90 years. Beyond CSS, Blair developed many philosophy classes, including business ethics, biomedical ethics, philosophy of religion, and symbolic logic. As a colleague, Blair was also good. When I arrived, he asked me what classes I'd like to teach and allowed me to teach them. Of course, maybe I chose the right ones, and so he didn't have to say anything, but at least he seemed to. He also said that he had been the junior member of the philosophy department for over 25 years, and as a result, he had taught every summer since he had been here. And he didn't say, "Now your time, junior." But he asked if I wouldn't mind teaching every other summer. And I think it spoke to his nature and importance of being a just person. He didn't teach all those summers for overload pay. It was because he had promised nursing students that a full-time instructor would teach biomedical ethics each summer to ensure that they got a rigorous class that was requested. Blair, in fact, fought against teaching overload, something we can learn from, I think. Not because he wanted to sail or garden more, but because he knew that more overload would cheapen all of his classes. Blair put 70 to 80 hours teaching normal load during fall and winter semesters. Why? Because he was meticulously prepared and gave students paper assignments that often took close to an hour each to grade, given the extensive comments he wrote. Blair knew he would have to eliminate some papers, tests, or preparation if he taught too much. He knew students deserved a rigorous class that challenged them to think and to write better. Along this line, I think we can also learn from Blair about avoiding burnout as teachers, staff, and even administrators. He had those papers, tough readings, thick blue book tests till his final class. He always considered and rejected excuses. He'd bring them up. He never said, "I don't assign papers because they're so bad." I don't know, maybe you've heard that one. Or, "I don't give comments on papers because they don't read them anyway." He knew these were poor excuses, and students deserved better. I think he didn't burn out. He didn't do that because he cared so much for his students in the college. When a student failed Blair's class, he felt like he failed. He did all he could to nurture student development while keeping high standards. So I just want to say thank you to Blair. Thank you for being a good colleague and friend. Thank you for leaving a legacy of the importance of philosophy and critical thinking at Muskegon Community College. And thank you for the growth you gave to everyone you touched while here. The college and the community have a great sense of gratitude. So the last comments, I'll give it, we'll be done until we hear from Blair. Come from a former student, as I mentioned. Ryan was a student here. He then went on to Grand Valley, finished his undergraduate, then he went to the University of Miami in Florida and got his PhD in philosophy. And he is currently teaching at Georgia Perimeter College near Atlanta, and really is a great person and philosopher, and is publishing quite a bit now, and is very impressive. In fact, Blair had told me about Ryan before I met him, and then summer came along, and we had always had this philosophy reading group, and Ryan was there. And I tell you, when Ryan started to dissect an argument in a book that we were reading, it was kind of like when you first heard Adele, you know, and you're like, geez, he's good. So, so he sent me a few comments that I'll read here to finish. Let me start by thanking Andy for the chance to say a few words about my teacher and friend, Blair Morrissey. I truly wish I could be there to deliver these comments in person, but alas, I have to be here in Atlanta for my own students with a new semester starting this week, something I know Blair understands. There's so much I could say about Blair, as a teacher and as a person, most of which I would wager that everyone gathered here already knows to be true. Blair is a uniquely dedicated, talented, and caring teacher. He always went the extra mile to help students who might be struggling both in and out of the classroom. He knew how to encourage quiet students with something to say in a way that would help them come out of their shells. I was one of these. He knew how to make class lively and fun, to spark spirited conversations among his students, to let those conversations run free when they were constructive, and to rein us in and guide us when they weren't. He knew how to get students to think deeply and care about philosophical issues. Even now, 2 decades later, I regularly think back to the model that Blair set for me while I'm trying to figure out how to effectively run my own classes. More than anything, I just want to express my deep gratitude to Blair for everything. Thank you for your detailed, insightful, constructive comments on every paper I wrote, something which I now know is incredibly difficult to do when you have so many students. Thank you for entertaining my endless questions after class, for constructing an independent study to satisfy my desire to dig deeper into ethical theory, for inviting me to participate in those reading groups with other faculty and students. Thank you for all the things you did to nurture and shape me as a student and as a philosopher, both when I was first beginning to explore the subject and then later, even after I had gone on to my bachelor's degree and then my PhD. I wouldn't be who I am or where I am without everything you did for me. And I have no doubt there are many others among your former students who can say the same. From many years of experience as a student and as a teacher, I can think of nobody I've ever known more deserving of this award. So now we'll give the award to Blair, and then he's got some comments to make. Here's Larry.
Thank you. It is my distinct pleasure, honor to award Blair Morrissey Distinguished Faculty. Congratulations.
I'm wondering if I need this. Raise your hands in the back if you believe I do and I'll know. Will that work? Sure. Well, that was very kind, and I'm very close to tears, and I'm going to have to try to recover from that. A lot of that seems to me to be exaggerated, but it sure is nice to hear. Andy asked me to talk for about 10 minutes, and I hope you can bear with me on that. I'll get going right now. This is a tremendous honor, being named to be among the distinguished faculty at Muskegon Community College. I want to thank Randy for his remarks, and Andy for his, and the other people for those. I'd like to thank Dean Breitenbach, President Nesberry, and the Board of Trustees, and all the colleagues I had over the years, and the students I had over the years, and frankly the taxpayers of the county and elsewhere that made the college possible. And if you've been around as long as I, you know we had an opponent back there, and it wasn't always the case that we thought the school would be funded. Okay. I first want to discuss a philosophy I found troubling when I first encountered it. It is still troubling to me today, but less so. I'll then talk about a second philosophy, which I think is in part an answer to the first one. A little background before I get going. I rejected a form of argument for morality probably as a very early teenager. And I know some of you will use that form of argument. The form of argument is something is right, X is right, if it says so in a certain sacred work. And I sort of rejected that as the sacred works would vary. Be that the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Hebrew Bible, an expanded Christian Bible. And I noted that the people generally, the source that they liked was generally the one that was very close to where they grew up. And if they changed, it usually was just for a different version of that. So that line of reasoning. did not work well for me. Well, then as an undergraduate, I encountered nihilism, the claim that nothing is really right or wrong. And you still hear people say it. I don't think many people really believe it, but they'll use it as a weapon against other people. You know, because if you think about it, if nothing's really right or wrong, then there's nothing really wrong with the Holocaust. That's outrageous. Nothing wrong with lying, stealing, assault, and a whole bunch of other things, and nothing right, I guess, with kindness and benevolence. So that's a disturbing view. Nothing's really right or wrong. But more disturbing is when I discovered it was quite current in the natural sciences, quite current in philosophy, quite current in the social sciences. Well, that's then getting to be, you know, to me, quite disturbing. I usually avoid anecdotes, but here comes one. I met a person within the last week, a very agreeable, nice person, who was a political science instructor at a nearby 4-year school. And I was sort of writing these ideas, and so I decided to find out where he was on what is anything really morally right or wrong. So I asked him, you know, I guess over a beer or whatever we were having, and he avoided the question as we often do. And then I said, come on, give me an answer. And his answer was, well, I think A.J. Ayer was essentially right. A.J. Ayer was a nihilist back in the 1920s. And so my claim is that nihilism is still out there, frequently in social science, particularly maybe in economics. That doesn't make it true or false either, but it makes it a real topic that we need to be concerned about. Now, some years later, while I was in grad school, the American philosopher John Rawls published his rather unreadable book, A Theory of Justice. This book has been very influential in philosophy. It's not so much that there are a bunch of Rawlsians running around, but there are people influenced by Rawls. But unfortunately, it's not influential outside of philosophy, and it's unknown to most Americans generally. And when they do know something, it's precious little. Even the economist Robert Reich, who you might know, someone told him to put something about Rawls in his book. He put something on a page, and then he didn't know what to say, and he went on to something else. Someone should have told him to cut it out. Rawls used and developed social contract thinking that has a long history and is known to most Americans as it is implicit in our Constitution, its ratification, and into our form of government today. The core to social contract philosophy is the claim that the best form of government is what people would pick if they were free to pick it. And so you can see in Philadelphia, we sort of did something like that. We wrote a constitution, and later we ratified it, and somehow that legitimates our constitution today and our form of government. Rawls rejected this type of social contract theory, holding that real people can and do make errors due to mistakes about the facts, mistakes in logic, and mistakes due to an improper influence of self-interest. Real people can pick or write a constitution that lacks a Bill of Rights. Real people can pick a constitution that tolerates slavery and excludes women, poor people, blacks, aboriginal people, and many others from full citizenship. So, boy, that's a little bit disturbing if you are an American and you want to claim that our Constitution legitimates everything. You have an attack on that. So Rawls changes social contract theory. And that's something else I'd like the general public to know about philosophy. It develops and changes over time. And you don't want to say for sure for the better, although I guess I frequently think it is for the better. So Rawls changes it, and I'm going to enumerate some of those changes. The contract is no longer what real people would pick. We need a thought experiment. He asks, what would people pick if they met 3 conditions? Perfect knowledge of the facts, perfect logic, and behind the veil of ignorance. And that means they don't know their personal properties. They don't know if they're young or old, healthy or sick, motivated or not. They don't know anything except they're human beings. So the first condition is they have full knowledge, but they don't have full knowledge of their personal properties. I think I can skip that. I'm sure you're hungry. So the contract has to be a thought experiment. He changes it in the idea in a second way, too. First, as we've seen, it's not what real people might pick. They might omit a Bill of Rights, as I said, endorse slavery and the exclusion of virtually all people except rich white people. And I think that's something for us to think about today. We've changed a lot of that, but there are pressures out there, I don't have to tell you, to maybe change some of those things back. And those are a little scary to me. The next major change Rawls makes is his idealized agents are not to pick just their form of government, but also their moral code and their economic system. So we're broadening the scope of social contract theory at the same time as it's no longer what real people would pick because he thinks they can blow it. And thirdly, he makes the following claims, and we're getting real close to the end. He makes the following claims about what he thinks they'd pick. And he goes to great length to say he might be wrong about any part of this. I mean, he knows that. It's giving you a sketch of a rather long and difficult book. So for their government, remember, they're going to pick their form of government. This is sort of the old idea of social contract. And he thinks they'd pick a democracy with extensive individual rights. I like that. That's sort of a justification of the society we have, and many students have pointed that out to me. And I think it's sort of nice to know some intellectual underpinnings of our society rather than maybe just worship it as people tell us to. For their moral code, he thinks they'd pick one that is essentially like the one we grow up with. It limits assault, stealing, and it fosters generosity and kindness. Now, it's not going to solve particular problems like what do we do about abortion and stuff. But the general idea of their picking a moral code like the one that I am sure each and every one of you would defend, that seems obvious to me. If you're not sure about it, get Andy or somebody, Connor, to teach a several session course where you think about it and debate it. Now, so they pick their government, they pick their moral code, but they also pick their economic system, and this is probably where it's most controversial. He thinks they'd pick a modified capitalism, at least that's what I want to call it, that uses material and other incentives to encourage productivity, but that also has mechanisms that particularly assist people at the bottom. So let's do a short recap of this. Rawls inherits a social contract theory that could support slavery and other undesirable outcomes. He changes it so that it is now supposed to identify not just the best form of government, but also the best moral code and economic system. And he claims that his social contract theory, thus changed, supports a society a lot like the one we have. Now, there is an interesting difference. Our Constitution, as it is right now, doesn't have, I don't think it has constitutional support for any kind of transfer mechanisms to people at the bottom. I mean, I don't think you'll see in it that a community college is a required sort of thing, which is, as a matter of fact, a kind of transfer to people who aren't particularly from the upper classes. Upper classes folks are welcome here, but it's people with less money that flourish here and that can afford this place. Perhaps the most controversial part is whether Rawlsian agents would pick this modified capitalism with extreme redistributive responsibilities. I think they would, but as I say, I hope you pursue that with Andy and Connor. Now, a few final points. We'll be done in 90 seconds or 2 minutes. Rawls supplies an answer to the nihilist. Remember that guy who I said, you know, nothing's really right or wrong? I sort of said that's very common in our society. I think it's very common in maybe not the natural sciences, but I had an economist friend who I asked one time, and he said, no, you can't have any value judgments in economics. Well, I think he has all kinds of value judgments, but he doesn't want to acknowledge them. So that, be that as it may, Rawls has answered my problem at least good enough for me. He maybe hasn't proven that the morality that we all grew up with is true. Remember, he says it's not true. I mean, the nihilist says it's not true. But it's sure justified in my book of perfectly rational people who think well, who don't know their personal properties, so they can't distort it very well. If they'd pick it, that's a pretty good justification, if not true. Second thing, it seems to me we ought to try to reason like Rawlsian agents, and that we seek all relevant facts. Our goal is to reason well, and we try not to just make our arguments about justice the pushing of our own individual self-interest, as often as that indeed is the case. Those ideas are similar to a theological theory. I might have upset a few people at the beginning when I rejected certain kinds of theological reasoning, but similar to a theological theory that if God is all-knowing, someone could say, and perfectly and benevolent towards human beings, then what he recommends as the best government, moral code, and economic system would be similar to what I think Rawlsian agents would pay. So I don't know what people interested in divine command theory are going to do with that, but I think there is a sort of a coming together in some theological strands and some of the stuff Rawls does. Last page. If one accepts Rawlsian conclusions, the most extreme may be his claim that we have a duty to a just society to help those at the bottom. But this is now where I think, basically I help support the beliefs I think we all already have. The place where it's different is this business about the economic system. If Rawls is right, helping is not supererogatory. That's some jargon that says, well, it's a nice thing to do, but you certainly don't have to do it. There's no moral obligation to be generous. I'm not even sure what those of you who are Christian would say about the moral obligation to be generous. But for Rawls, there is a contractual obligation to be worried about the people at the bottom. Now, if you were to study Rawlsian stuff in the literature since, they argue about whether you just have to bring the bottom to a certain point and then you can forget, or whether in some sense you have to keep ratcheting the bottom up. And I sort of leave that to you. But again, for Rawls, it's an obligation to be concerned about the distribution of life's opportunities, not just something you do. And finally, the last point, I encourage you to see the value of philosophy in the curriculum of students today. Please don't let the worthwhile goal of vocationalism push philosophy right out of the curriculum. And it is being pushed. And I think it's justifiable. I mean, I think philosophy is justifiable in the curriculum, but it doesn't make the person money right away at the time. And we have to sort of decide, is it important for our citizens to sort of understand the rational justification I just gave you for a society is a lot like the one we have. Thank you very much.